Let's go to more on this historic US, UK, Australia nuclear submarine deal. I'm joined by former Labor Defence Minister Joel Fitzgibbon. Thanks for joining us, Joel. Do you support this deal? It would have surprised you. Do you think it's the right move?
It's a big move, Chris, and yes, I do support it. And once you get through the 8-year delay, the significant amount of money which has been wasted, around $4 billion as I understand it, the damage it's done to our relationship with our good friends and partners in France, and the impact on businesses and jobs which will flow from the switch. After you get through all that, I can say that it is a very welcome announcement. It's an announcement which will significantly enhance our capability, our force projection, and of course, our capacity to signal deterrence.
Well, just on that criticism, let's have a look at what Richard Marles has had to say, the Labor's official spokesperson on this, and he's been very critical of the Morrison government.
Failure of the government in managing the future submarine program is one of the biggest failures in defence procurement in our nation's history, and today Scott Morrison absolutely owns that.
Richard Marles, and there's a bit of truth in that, right? Of course, it would be much better if you'd not gone down the French path. But haven't both parties here in government done the wrong thing for decades in ruling out nuclear submarines, yourself included, when you were Defence Minister?
Yeah, that's right, Chris. It's now 11 years or more since my 2009 white paper. And of course, the big headline in that white paper was our plan to significantly enhance our underwater capability. And here we are in 2021, and we're starting from scratch. It's unfortunate. But yes, we did rule out nuclear submarines at the time. And I later publicly said I thought that was a mistake. Why did we do that? Well, we were concerned that we didn't have the civil industry here in Australia to support it. And that was obviously a very important point. But I must admit too, I think at the time there was some concern about the public reaction to going down the nuclear path. What of course has changed now and of course we didn't have access to the technology that the Prime Minister announced today, Chris. So we weren't able to do it without a civil industry. We now can. But I think it was a mistake to rule it out even before we went through the options back then. But it's a lot easier to do it now. Another thing has changed too, Chris. Back then, of course, our underwater capability was mainly about intelligence, or in other words, sneaking up into certain parts of the world and listening. We have now really, given the changing strategic circumstances in the region, we've now really moved to an underwater capability, which is about strike and deterrence. And that's not an insignificant change. And now that allows us to have a bigger boat than we thought we could get away with back in 2009, because that shift means you can have a bigger submarine.
Yeah, it's clearly about defending ourselves and the region from a very aggressive and expansionist China. But former Labor Prime Minister Paul Keating has put out a statement today, and he's decried this decision. He says it's a wrong call, and he says this arrangement would witness a further dramatic loss of Australian sovereignty as material dependency on the United States robbed Australia of any freedom or choice in any engagement Australia may deem appropriate. He's saying we're just tied too closely to the US now. Isn't that presenting a false choice? Aren't we really in that sort of reality now with our US alliance? And doesn't this afford us much more security benefit than it does in terms of a downside?
Public policy is about choices, Chris. And, Paul makes some important points. First of all, we've talked a lot about sovereign capability since we were hit with COVID-19 and how we've learned how important that is. And he makes a good point there. But we've tried, of course, to build submarines of our own invention here in Australia. It hasn't worked out very well. We are much better off with something which is more like off the shelf, ready to build and go. And, Paul has a long history here. He spoke in, I think, 1996 about getting our security not from Asia, but in Asia. In other words, he was talking about heavy engagement and building cooperation. And, that still stands. But I think we can do both. I think we can engage better and build the architecture of cooperation, but at the same time, hedge against changing strategic circumstances and indeed threats in the region. And I think we do need to do that. And I think today's announcement very much enhances our capacity to do so.
Now, when you're a Defence Minister, Labor spending on defence fell by the wayside a bit. The Coalition have been trying to pick that up. We don't know the cost of this yet, but it's going to probably demand an even greater share of our national spending going on defence, surely.
Absolutely, Chris. The point about the alliance, well, there are many points to be made about the alliance, but we can't expect to have look for a security guarantor in the United States, but expect them to spend all the money, Chris. We need to be spending at least 3% of GDP on defence to make that a fair arrangement, and we need to do it quickly. Kevin Rudd and I massively enhanced spending on defence, particularly relating to that 2009 white paper. Unfortunately, during the latter parts of the Gillard years and trying to fund the necessary economic stimulus as a result in response to the global financial crisis, that government did cut back spending, which from my perspective was a very great shame, because these things are cumulative. It's the opposite of compounding interest. You're always trying to catch up on those losses. But that's history now, as is the government's mistakes on the French option. National security should be a matter of bipartisanship, and we all now need to look forward and get on with it.
Joel, you're the current member for Hunter. You'll be retiring at the elections. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm about to speak to the bloke from the Nats who wants to take your seat.
Oh, great. Good on you, Chris.